In Las Vegas's roaring T-Mobile Arena, a cocky, undefeated MMA phenom was about to enjoy his loudest victory lap yet. The post-fight celebration turned deadly quiet when Blaze, the Reaper, Carter publicly mocked martial arts legend Chuck Norris live, on the mic, under the lights. Chuck Norris wasn't your typical VIP spectator. For decades, he was a 6-time undefeated world karate champion, known for training elite military forces and founding his own martial arts system. When Carter dared him into the cage, he had no idea he was challenging a master who had long transcended ego or applause. Chuck's silent ascent into the cage triggered a confrontation that would redefine what fighting and respect really meant. What began as a night of arrogant spectacle would become a public reckoning of ego and honor. The MMA world would never be the same after an 84-year-old legend taught its hottest rising star the most important lesson of his life without ever throwing a punch in anger. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. A brutal punch echoed across the arena, sending the fighter crashing to the mat. The crowd gasped as the referee dove in, checking if the man could even move. But the winner was already parading. Around arms raised high, grin stretched wide. He strutted past the cameras, leaned over his opponent, and shouted insults. Loud, cocky, unapologetic. Some fans roared with excitement. Others exchanged uneasy glances. Not far from the cage, front row, Chuck Norris sat quietly. Expression unreadable. No clapping, no reaction. Just sharp, steady eyes locked on the fighter. The Las Vegas arena pulsed with raw energy. Every seat filled. Every voice blending into a deafening roar that echoed off the walls. Floodlights beamed down onto the polished cage at center stage. Cameras flashed like lightning as fans shouted from every corner. Some waved banners. Others leaned forward on the edge of their seats, eyes locked on the fighters. The night's energy felt alive, almost electric, charged with the promise of something big. In the middle of this chaos sat Chuck Norris, calm and composed, ringside in the VIP section. Dressed in a simple dark jacket over a button-down shirt, he did not move. No entourage, no attention-seeking. Yet eyes naturally shifted toward him. He sat effortlessly still, one hand resting loosely on his knee, the other by his side. No grin, no cheers, just focus. His eyes never left the cage. At 84, the lines on his face told stories of discipline and battles won long before most of tonight's fighters were born. His presence was unassuming, yet undeniable like gravity itself. Big Mike, his security companion, stood several paces back, almost invisible despite his size. Former Special Forces, now Chuck's friend and protector. He never spoke much, but his eyes missed nothing. All eyes inside the cage, however, centered on one man, Blaze, the Reaper Carter. The undefeated young fighter whose name everyone had chanted earlier. A rising star, not just for his skill but for how he won. Arrogant, flashy, ruthless. He thrived on spectacle, lived to dominate not only his opponent but the crowd. Every move he made seemed calculated to provoke a reaction. He bounced on his heels, glancing at the cameras, soaking in the attention. Fans either loved him or hated him, but no one ignored him. And that's another victory for the unstoppable Blaze Carter, Kayla Torres announced from the commentary booth, her voice professional, despite the tightness in her expression. A former champion herself before a knee injury, she understood the sport's brutality, but also its honor code. Something Blaze Carter seemed to have missed entirely. 15 straight wins, 15 knockouts. Controversial but effective, her co-commentator added. Across the cage stood Blaze's opponent, a seasoned veteran with years of fights under his belt. Respected, not flashy, not arrogant, the kind who let his skills speak quietly. But none of that mattered tonight. From the moment the bell rang, Blaze attacked. Fast, aggressive, sharp, relentless. His strikes came in hard, giving his opponent no space to breathe. The veteran fought back, but the younger man controlled the pace as if he had something to prove. It ended brutally. A quick combination, a clean hit to the jawand. The veteran hit the mat hard. The sound of impact echoed. The referee dove in, signaling the fight was over. Medics rushed into the cage, checking if the fallen fighter could move. The crowd erupted. Some fans screamed wildly, thrilled by the show. Others shifted uncomfortably at how fast, how ruthless it had been. But Blaze didn't care. He strutted around the cage, arms raised high, flexing for cameras, playing to the crowd, sweat dripping, grin wide. He shouted at the fans, mocking his opponent openly. No humility, no restraint. That's how a real fighter does it, he shouted, voice carrying through the arena. Not these old school has-beens who think technique beats power. From the sidelines, Coach Ramirez, a veteran trainer who had worked with both rising stars and legends, shook his head. He had tried to mentor Blaze once, before the fame, before the ego. Now he watched with quiet disappointment as the young man soaked in adoration he hadn't earned. This kid's got no respect, Ramirez muttered to another coach beside him. All flash, no foundation. Yet, amidst all this noise, Chuck Norris remained perfectly still. While the arena erupted, he sat, shoulders relaxed, gaze sharp, expression unreadable. He watched everything, every move, every taunt. He didn't clap, he didn't react. He simply observed. Jordan Lee, the event's social media host, bounced around the edge of the cage with his camera crew, live streaming reactions. Yo, this is insane. The Reaper just destroyed another vet. Drop a fire emoji if you're feeling this energy. As Jordan panned his camera across the crowd, he caught sight of Chuck Norris and zoomed in. Hold up, is that Chuck Norris in the house? The legend himself, Blaze noticed. Between the lights, the chants, the flashing cameras, his eyes flicked to the front row. Chuck. He locked on immediately, grin stretching wider. Still holding the mic, he wiped sweat from his brow, pacing the cage like a showman. Hey, Norris! His voice rang out across the stadium. I see you sitting there all quiet. What's wrong? Don't like seeing how real fighting's done these days? Gasps spread like wildfire. The stadium shifted, some fans laughed, others whispered and nudged friends. Is he serious? Kayla Torres whispered into her mic, forgetting it was live. Is he actually calling out Chuck Norris? Blaze continued, feeding off the shocked energy. I get it must be hard watching us take the sport to places you museum pieces never could. All those movies. All those poses. He mimicked an exaggerated karate stance, drawing scattered laughter. But this isn't the movies, old man. This is real. He pointed to the mat where his opponent was being helped to his feet. No stunt doubles here. From the commentary booth, Kayla's face hardened. For those viewers who might not know, Chuck Norris isn't just an actor. He's a 6-time undefeated world karate champion. He's trained special forces. He literally invented his own martial art form. Her words barely registered over Blaze's continued taunting. What do you say, Norris? Want to see if those old bones can still take a hit? Or are you just here for the early bird special? Another wave of gasps rolled through the stadium. Some fans hooted. Others stared, caught between shock and excitement. The arena's security staff exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to intervene. Still, Chuck didn't react. He sat exactly where he had been, posture loose. Eyes fixed on the fighter, no grin. No anger. Just unreadable calm. The fighter bounced on his feet, egging the crowd on. Come on, Chuck. One round, show us if those moves were ever real. Cameras turned toward Chuck. Murmurs spread. Some people leaned forward, breath held in anticipation. But Chuck's face never shifted. He let the fighter talk. Didn't need to answer. Slowly, silently, the focus began to shift not to Blaze's words, but to Chuck's quiet, controlled presence. Everyone was watching, waiting. The arena buzzed, noise rolling like a wave across the seats but ringside. Everything felt oddly still. Blaze, sensing he might be losing the crowd's attention, escalated. "What's wrong? Afraid? Or just too old to climb these steps?" He laughed, a sharp sound that echoed. "Maybe we should get you a walker." At the commentary table, Kayla removed her headset. "This is disgusting," she muttered to her producer. "Someone needs to shut this down." But no one moved to stop it. Everyone seemed frozen, waiting for what would happen next. Finally, after what seemed an eternity of taunts, something changed. Not in Chuck's expression, but in his eyes. Something ancient and knowing a decision made. Without a word, Chuck Norris stood. It was neither rushed nor showy. Rose with quiet precision, every motion controlled. He removed his jacket smoothly and handed it to Big Mike, who appeared beside him without being called. The crowd's roar dimmed to a stunned murmur. All eyes locked on the legend as he took his first step toward the cage. Chuck's first step toward the cage silenced the arena. His second step parted the crowd like the Red Sea. Security guards shifted uncertainly, unsure whether to block his path or clear it. One look from Big Mike resolved their dilemma. They stepped aside. Backstage, the production team scrambled. "Are we legally covered for this?" A producer hissed into his headset. "Can we even let this happen?" "Try stopping it," another answered, transfixed by the monitors. This just became the most watched MMA event in history. Inside the cage, Blaze's cocky grin flickered. Just for a moment. A flash of uncertainty crossing his face before he doubled down, playing to the crowd again. "Well, look at that. Grandpa's coming down to play." Jordan Lee's livestream count exploded as he followed Chuck's steady approach. "Oh my God, guys. This is actually happening. Chuck Norris is heading to the cage. Legend V's Reaper is trending worldwide already." The arena's atmosphere transformed with each of Chuck's measured steps. What had been a rowdy celebration of Blaze's victory now felt like a solemn procession. Fans who had been screaming seconds before fell silent. Those seated stood. Those standing stepped back. In the commentary booth, Kayla Torres's voice turned reverent. "For our younger viewers, let me explain what you're witnessing. Chuck Norris isn't just a meme or an action star. Before his Hollywood career, he was a fighter's fighter. 6-time undefeated world karate champion. The first Westerner in the history of Taekwondo to earn an 8th-degree black belt. He's trained elite military units in hand-to-hand combat." Her co-commentator nodded. "And at 84 years old, he still trains daily. There are videos of him doing full splits at 80 that most 20-year-olds can't manage." As Chuck approached the cage steps, flashbacks of his career rippled across the arena's giant screens. Footage from his championships in the 60s and 70s. Exhibition matches where opponents could barely touch him. Early Hollywood days, where he performed his own stunts. Recent charity events where he demonstrated the same precision and flexibility that had made him a legend decades ago. The juxtaposition was striking, the footage of a young champion dissolving into the present-day man now climbing the steel steps. Different, yet somehow unchanged. Older, yet no less formidable. Backstage, Coach Ramirez cornered Blaze's manager. "Stop this now," he demanded. "Your boy has no idea what he's done." "Are you kidding?" the manager answered, eyes gleaming. "This is publicity you can't buy. Win or lose, Blaze is set for life after this." Ramirez grabbed the younger man's collar. "There's a difference between a fighter and a warrior. Your boy is about to learn that the hard way." Meanwhile, Chuck reached the platform. The cage door opened without anyone visibly operating it. No announcer introduced him. No music played. He simply entered the same way he'd entered dojos and arenas for 7 decades. With respect, with purpose, without fanfare. Inside the cage, Blaze's entourage scattered like startled birds, slipping through the door on the opposite side. Even the referee backed away, leaving just the 2 men, the brash youth and the silent legend. "I'll give you this, old man," Blaze called out, his voice carrying a slight tremor he couldn't quite control. "You've got balls. But this isn't for show." He bounced on his feet, shaking out his arms. "This is gonna hurt." Chuck said nothing. He simply stood in the center of the cage, feet planted shoulder width apart, hands loose at his sides. Not in a fighting stance. Not tensed for combat. Just present. Utterly, completely present. The contrast was stark. Blaze is sweaty, amped up, still breathing hard from his earlier fight, circling, flexing, performing for the cameras. Chuck still, centered, breath even, eyes never leaving his opponent. One man trying to own the space, the other simply inhabiting it. "You should know," Blaze continued, trying to recapture his earlier bravado. "I grew up watching your movies. Always thought they were bullshit. All those kicks in slow motion, all those staged punches." He smirked. "Let's see how that Hollywood training holds up in the real world." Chuck's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Not anger. Not even determination. Something deeper. More elemental. The look of a man who has moved beyond the need to prove anything, yet will not allow disrespect to stand unchallenged. In the silence that followed, the arena grew so quiet you could hear the buzz of the overhead lights. Thousands held their breath. Millions watching the live stream leaned closer to their screens. Big Mike stood at the base of the cage, Chuck's jacket folded neatly over one arm. He caught Chuck's eye and gave the smallest of nods. A gesture between old friends that said everything words couldn't. "Be careful. Show him. Come back safe." Chuck returned the nod, then turned his full attention to Blaze. The official cage announcer, caught off guard by the unplanned confrontation, tried to regain some control. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice boomed, "it appears we have an unscheduled exhibition. In the blue corner, our winner tonight, the undefeated phenom, Blaze the Reaper Carter." The crowd's response was mixed cheers from his fans, boos from others, an undercurrent of uncertainty from all. And in the red corner, the announcer paused, clearly struggling with the unprecedented situation. Martial arts legend, 6-time world champion, the one and only Chuck Norris. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The arena erupted in a thunderous roar that seemed to shake the very foundations. Not just cheers, but a sound of reverence, of witnessing history. Among the crowd, older fans explained to younger ones why this moment mattered. Parents who had grown up with Chuck Norris as their hero told their children about the man behind the memes. Veterans stood in silent respect for a fellow warrior. Even Jordan Lee, who had been live commenting non-stop, fell silent. His usual stream of hype cut short as he stared at the two figures in the cage. "Guys," he finally whispered to his audience, "I think we're about to witness something real." The referee, unsure of the protocol, approached the center of the cage. "Keep it clean," he instructed, though his voice lacked conviction. "Standard exhibition rules." Blaze nodded impatiently. Chuck gave a single, respectful bow. "Back to your corners and wait for the bell," the referee continued. Blaze retreated, rolling his shoulders, psyching himself up. But Chuck remained exactly where he stood. Center cage. Immovable. The referee looked uncertain for a moment, then stepped back. The timekeeper, taking his cue, sounded the bell. The fight that wasn't a fight had begun. The bell's sharp note cut through the arena's tension, signaling the start of something no one had seen coming. In that suspended moment between anticipation and action, thousands of phones lifted in unison, capturing what everyone sensed would be historic. Blaze, riding high on adrenaline and bravado, didn't hesitate. He exploded forward with the same aggressive style that had demolished his earlier opponenta blitz of footwork, feints, and raw power designed to overwhelm. His first combination came lightning fast. Jab, cross, hook, the movements fluid and precise. The strikes that had flattened so many challengers cut through air, finding nothing but empty space. Chuck had moved. Not dramatically. Not with flash. Just a subtle shift of weight. A minimal turn of his upper body. Each movement precise to the millimeter. Enough to make Blaze miss, but not enough to compromise his own position. The young fighter blinked, momentarily confused. He recalibrated and unleashed a sharp kick toward Chuck's midsection. Again, the strike found nothing but air, as Chuck simply wasn't where he should have been. The crowd began to murmur. This wasn't the slow-motion, movie star dodging they'd expected from an 84-year-old man. This was something else entirely. Economy of motion raised to an art form. Blaze's face tightened. He pressed forward with a more complex sequence jab. Cross, body hook. High kick movements that had earned him sponsorships and highlight reels. Each strike technically flawless. Each finding nothing but empty space as Chuck moved with a grace that made defense look effortless. "Are you seeing this?" Kayla whispered into her microphone, the commentary booth silent, save for her hushed voice. "He's not even counter-attacking. Just existing in the spaces between Blaze's strikes." Her co-commentator nodded, speechless. Inside the cage, frustration crept into Blaze's movements. His combinations grew wilder, his footwork less disciplined. "Fight back," he hissed through clenched teeth. "Stop running." Chuck's expression never changed. He wasn't running. He wasn't retreating. He was simply not there when the strikes arrived. A lifetime of training distilled into pure efficiency. From ringside, Coach Ramirez watched with knowing eyes. He'd seen this before, decades ago, when he was a young boxer and Chuck was making his name in the martial arts world. It wasn't evasion, it was mastery of space and time. The difference between a fighter and a martial artist laid bare. Blaze, growing desperate, charged forward with a wild haymaker. The punch carried his full weight, all his frustration. This time, Chuck didn't just evade. His right hand came up not in a counter, but in a simple open palm block that absorbed the strike and redirected its energy. The subtle shift sent Blaze stumbling past him, thrown off balance by his own force. The crowd gasped. For the first time, uncertainty flashed clearly across Blaze's face. He had expected an old man trading on past glory, perhaps with a few moves still in his arsenal. What he faced instead was something his training hadn't prepared him for: efficiency perfected through decades of practice. No wasted motion, no unnecessary effort, just pure martial discipline. "He hasn't thrown a single strike," Jordan Lee whispered into his live stream, his usual hype replaced by genuine awe. "Chuck Norris hasn't even attacked, and he's completely controlling this fight." Blaze reset his stance, took a deep breath, and tried a different approach. He circled more cautiously now, feinting, looking for openings. When he struck again, it was with more calculation, a probing jab followed by a leg kick, testing Chuck's reactions rather than trying to overwhelm him. Chuck slipped the jab with a slight tilt of his head and lifted his leg just enough for the kick to pass harmlessly underneath. Still, he offered no counterattack. His hands remained loose, his posture relaxed. The message was clear to everyone watching. This wasn't about winning. It wasn't about domination. It was about something deeper. In the silent exchange between techniques, Chuck was teaching, showing the difference between fighting for the crowd and standing in your truth. Between chasing validation and living with integrity. Blaze, however, couldn't read the lesson yet. His ego was still too loud. "Is this all you've got?" he taunted, voice less confident than before. "Just gonna dodge all night? Where's the legend everyone talks about?" Chuck's eyes met his directly for the first time. Not with anger or challenge, but with something more unsettling, complete clarity. The look of a man who had nothing to prove, nothing to fear, and nothing to hide. That look pierced through Blaze's defenses more effectively than any physical strike could have. For a brief moment, the young fighter glimpsed something that shook his foundation. The unbridgeable gulf between his accomplishments and what stood before him. Between his skill and true mastery. The moment passed quickly. Blaze's survival instinct kicked in, drowning vulnerability in a fresh surge of aggression. He launched a flurry of strikes: jab, cross, uppercut, spinning back fist, each technically sound, each carrying knockout power. Chuck's response changed. Instead of simply evading, he began to parry open-hand redirections, so subtle they were almost invisible. Each of Blaze's strikes was met, guided away, their energy dispersed. Not blocked forcefully, but accepted and redirected, like water flowing around stone. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the dynamics of the confrontation transformed before their eyes. This wasn't a fight anymore. It was a demonstration of principles most of them had never witnessed at this level. Principles that had nothing to do with age, strength, or athletic prime. Blaze felt it too, though he couldn't name it. Something fundamentally different from the combat he knew. His strikes grew more desperate, his technique deteriorating as frustration mounted. "Fight me!" he shouted, voice cracking slightly. "Actually fight!" Chuck's first counterattack came so subtly that many missed it. As Blaze lunged forward with another wild hook, Chuck's open palm met his wrist, not to block, but to add just enough directional pressure to continue the strike's natural arc. The slight adjustment sent Blaze spinning past him, carried by his own momentum. As the younger fighter stumbled, trying to regain his balance, Chuck's other hand delivered a single, precise tap to his shoulder, barely more than a touch, yet placed with such perfect timing that Blaze dropped to one knee. The arena went completely silent. Blaze rose quickly, face flushed with humiliation. The touch hadn't hurt him. Hadn't even tried to hurt him. It had simply exposed how completely his balance could be compromised by someone who understood the body's mechanics at a fundamental level. What the hell was that? He snarled, embarrassment fueling his anger. Chuck didn't answer. He simply resumed his position, center cage, hands loose at his sides. Waiting. Present. The embodiment of patience earned through decades of discipline. For the first time, real doubt crept into Blaze's eyes. He had expected to embarrass an old legend, to prove his own superiority to a new generation. Instead, he found himself struggling against principles he couldn't even identify. From the commentary booth, Kayla Torres found her voice again. "What we're seeing," she said softly, "isn't about age or strength. It's about the difference between someone who fights for attention and someone who has dedicated their life to mastery. Between technique as performance and technique as truth." Her co-commentator nodded. Chuck Norris isn't trying to win this fight. He's trying to teach something that can't be taught with words. Inside the cage, Blaze's confidence continued to erode. Each failed combination, each effortlessly redirected strike, chipped away at the identity he'd constructed. The undefeated champion. The unstoppable force. The future of the sport. Now, facing an opponent who hadn't even thrown a real punch yet, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the hollowness of his own hype. Jordan Lee's live stream comments reflected the shifting mood. "Guys, I don't even know how to describe what we're seeing. This isn't fighting as we know it. This is something else. In the silence between exchanges, the arena held its collective breath. Everyone sensed the confrontation was building towards something decisive. Not a knockout or a submission, but a moment of truth that would transcend the physical. Blaze, desperate to reclaim control, gathered himself for one final, all-out assault. His eyes narrowed, his muscles tensed. This would be everything. He had speed, power, technique, all channeled into a blitz that no opponent, regardless of legend status, could withstand. Chuck saw it coming. Not through any tell in Blaze's stance, but through the recognition of a moment he had experienced many times before. The point where ego makes its final, desperate stand before truth breaks through. As Blaze launched forward, unleashing a blistering combination that seemed to fill the cage with motion and sound, Chuck made his decision. Not to humiliate, not to dominate, but to conclude with clarity what had begun in confusion. The lesson was about to reach its culmination. Blaze's all-out assault filled the cage with furious motion, a hurricane of strikes, thrown with desperate intensity. Jabs, crosses, hooks, uppercuts, elbows, knees, very weapon in his arsenal, unleashed in a single, sustained barrage. The display was impressive, a testament to his training and natural ability, but it was also revealing. Each strike carried not just physical force but emotional charge, anger, frustration, fear, and beneath it all, a creeping sense of inadequacy. This wasn't strategy anymore, it was catharsis. Chuck met the storm with impossible calm. Where Blaze was all motion, Chuck was all awareness. His movements remained minimal, precise, each shift, parry, and redirection, executed with an economy that made defense look like stillness. To the crowd, it appeared as though Blaze was fighting himself. His most powerful strikes met nothing but air, while his wildest attempts were gently guided into harmless trajectories. Not by strength or speed, but by timing and positioning so precise they seemed to bend reality itself. "This is insane," Jordan Lee whispered into his live stream. "It's like watching someone try to punch water." In the commentary booth, Kayla Torres leaned forward, eyes wide. "What you're seeing," she explained to viewers, "is the difference between fighting against someone and being in harmony with their energy. Chuck isn't opposing Blaze's force, she's working with it, redirecting it." Her co-commentator nodded. "It's the foundation of true martial arts. Not about who's stronger or faster, but who understands the physics of movement at a deeper level." Inside the cage, Blaze's frustration reached critical mass. Nothing was working. Not his speed, not his power, not his technique. All the attributes that had made him champion seemed suddenly irrelevant. Sweat poured down his face. His breathing grew ragged. His movements became increasingly desperate. "Fight back!" he shouted between gasps. "Actually fight!" For the first time since entering the cage, Chuck spoke. His voice was quiet, yet somehow carried through the arena's hushed atmosphere. "I am." Two simple words that landed more powerfully than any physical strike. Not dismissive, not mocking. Simply truth, stated without embellishment. Something in Blaze snapped. His face contorted with rage, and he launched forward with a wild, overhead right, a haymaker, thrown with every ounce of his remaining strength. The kind of punch that had ended matches and careers. Chuck didn't evade this time. Instead, he stepped into the strike, but at an angle that placed him just inside its arc. As Blaze's fist whistled past his ear, Chuck's open palm made contact with the younger fighter's extended wrist. Not a block, not a strike, just a touch at precisely the right point to redirect momentum. Physics did the rest. Blaze's own force, guided by that minimal contact, sent him spinning off balance. He stumbled, trying to recover, but his center of gravity was already compromised. Chuck's next movement was so subtle, many missed a slight extension of his foot, placed perfectly in the path of Blaze's stumbling recovery. Not a trip, not a sweep, just a presence that Blaze's own momentum carried him into. The young champion went down hard, sprawling onto the mat in an undignified heap. The crowd gasped. Blaze scrambled to his feet, face burning with humiliation. This wasn't supposed to happen. None of this was going according to plan. He was the champion, the future, the unstoppable force. How was an 84-year-old man making him look like an amateur? Lucky move, he spat, trying to salvage his pride. Chuck simply nodded, neither agreeing nor disagreeing. He resumed his position, center cage, hands loose at his sides. Waiting. Present. From ringside, Coach Ramirez watched with a mixture of satisfaction and sympathy. He'd seen this pattern before: young talents who confused technical skill with mastery, who mistook popularity for achievement. The lucky ones got this lesson early, before ego calcified into identity. Blaze was getting his lesson late. But perhaps not too late. Inside the cage, something began to shift in Blaze's approach. Necessity stripped away pretense. With his usual tactics failing, he fell back on fundamentals, the basics he'd learned before fame, before the highlight reels and social media following. His stance lowered. His movements became more conservative. His eyes, previously darting between Chuck and the crowd, now focused solely on his opponent. It was the first real change since the confrontation began. Not a strategic adjustment, but an authentic one. Chuck noted the shift. His eyes registered a flicker of approval. Subtle, barely perceptible, but there. Blaze launched his next combination, with less flash but more substantia, probing jab, followed by a textbook cross. His weight properly distributed, his mechanics clean. The strikes still didn't land as intended, but they came closer. The gap was narrowing. "Look at that," Kayla observed from commentary. "He's starting to actually fight instead of perform." For the next 30 seconds, the dynamic evolved. Blaze attacked with increasing technical precision, stripping away the excess that had defined his style. Chuck continued to evade and redirect, but his movements became more deliberate, more instructive. The exchanges took on a different quality: less a confrontation, more a conversation. Without words, Chuck was teaching. Each evasion demonstrated a principle. Each redirection contained a lesson. The very spacing between them became instructive, showing openings, vulnerabilities, opportunities. Some in the crowd began to sense the shift. The tension remained, but its quality changed. This wasn't building toward violence anymore, but toward understanding. Then came the moment that would be replayed millions of times across the world. Blaze, having found a rhythm in fundamentals, attempted to build upon it. He feinted left, then launched a perfectly executed right cross, textbook in its form, direct in its intention, the kind of punch that forms the backbone of all striking arts. This time, instead of evading, Chuck chose to counter. His movement was so fluid, so natural, it seemed to happen before Blaze's attack even began. A simple sidestep that placed him at the perfect angle, followed by an open palm strike to Blaze's extended shoulder. The contact was light, more demonstration than attack, but its placement was perfect. It caught Blaze at the exact point in his extension where his balance was most vulnerable. The young fighter staggered sideways, not hurt, but completely disrupted. Before he could recover, Chuck delivered a second open palm touch to his upper back again, not a strike meant to damage, but a precise contact that exploited the body's natural mechanics. Blaze's knees buckled, and he dropped to the mat once more. The arena erupted in a mixture of gasps and applause. Blaze rose slowly this time, his face showing not anger but confusion. He had thrown a technically perfect punch, the same punch that had won him championships. Yet he'd been countered with such effortless precision that it made his skills seem crude by comparison. How? The question escaped before he could stop it. Chuck's expression softened slightly. Not pity, but recognition, the acknowledgement of a teaching moment. Position before submission, he said quietly. Principle before technique. Simple words that contained decades of wisdom. Not just about fighting, but about living. About approaching any challenge from its fundamental truths rather than its surface appearances. For the first time, Blaze actually listened. Something in Chuck's tone, or perhaps in the undeniable evidence of what had just happened, cut through his defenses. His stance shifted, almost unconsciously, from aggressive to receptive. The crowd sensed the change. The atmosphere in the arena transformed once again from spectacle to ceremony, from entertainment to education. Phones remained raised, recording every moment. But the energy behind them had changed. This wasn't about capturing something to mock or celebrate later. It was about preserving something meaningful. I think we're witnessing a transition, Kayla said softly from commentary. From a fight to a lesson. Her co-commentator nodded. And maybe the most important one Blaze Carter will ever receive. Inside the cage, the young champion took a deep breath and reset his stance. Not the flashy, camera-ready posture he'd entered with, but something more grounded, more authentic. He moved forward again, but differently now, testing rather than attacking, asking questions with his body rather than making statements. Chuck responded in kind. His movements became more demonstrative, showing rather than simply countering. When Blaze threw a jab, Chuck didn't just evade, he showed the proper counter through his response. When Blaze attempted a kick, Chuck's positioning revealed why it wouldn't land and what would have worked instead. Without words, a dialogue formed. Technique, counter, adjustment, response. The language of martial arts in its purest form. For 2 minutes, the cage transformed into a dojo. The championship arena became a place of learning. Around the cage, the crowd watched in reverent silence. Even those who had come for blood now found themselves witnessing something rarer, transformation happening in real time. The social media feeds that had been flooded with mockery and hype now filled with words like respect, humbling, and masterclass. Jordan Lee, who had started the night chasing viral moments, now stood transfixed. His live stream continued, but his commentary had fallen away, letting the moment speak for itself. For perhaps the first time in his career, he understood that some things needed no amplification. I've been covering fights for 15 years, Kayla whispered into her microphone, and I've never seen anything like this. This isn't about age or competition anymore. This is about the core of what martial arts was always meant to be, the development of character through discipline. Inside the cage, the dynamic continued to evolve. Blaze was fighting differently now, not to win, not to impress, but to understand. Each exchange revealed something new. When Chuck redirected a punch, Blaze would pause, reset, and try a different angle. When a kick was evaded, he would adjust his distance and try again with better form. Slowly, incrementally, he was improving not just technically, but fundamentally. His movements became more economical, his balance more centered, his intent more focused. The flash was falling away, revealing the fighter he could become if ego didn't obstruct growth. Chuck noticed every change, acknowledged each improvement with subtle nods. His counters and redirections became teaching tools, each one offering a specific lesson about timing, distance, or leverage. Without words, he was sharing knowledge that had taken decades to accumulate. Then, with no warning, Chuck changed the dynamic completely. As Blaze launched a clean, focused jab technically better than anything he'd thrown all night, Chuck didn't evade or redirect. Instead, he moved forward, closing the distance with a speed that belied his age. Before Blaze could react, Chuck had executed a perfect sweep, taking the younger fighter's legs out from under him. The movement was so fluid, so effortless, that Blaze was on his back before he realized what had happened. Chuck stood over him, not in triumph but in completion. The lesson had reached its conclusion. The arena held its breath as Blaze looked up from the mat, eyes wide with a mixture of shock and revelation. Chuck stood above him, hand extended not in victory, but in offering. A bridge between what was and what could be. For a suspended moment, everything hung in the balance. Blaze's next action would define not just the end of this encounter, but potentially the direction of his future. Pride warred with humility, ego with understanding. Around them, thousands watched in silence. The usual roar of the crowd, the constant commentary, the social media chatterall had fallen away, leaving only the essential moment between two martial artists. Memories flashed through Blaze's mind in that frozen second, his first amateur fight, the hunger that had driven him, the gradual shift from passion to performance, the path that had led him here, flat on his back, humbled by a man old enough to be his grandfather, a man he had mocked, a man who had shown him not just defeat, but an entirely different way of being. Blaze reached up and took Chuck's hand. The simple gesture rippled through the arena like a physical force. As Chuck helped the younger fighter to his feet, spontaneous applause erupted, not the bloodthirsty cheering of earlier, but something deeper. Recognition of what they had witnessed. Not humiliation, but illumination. Standing face to face now, the contrast between the two men remained stark. Blaze young, powerful, sweating profusely, his confident facade cracked open to reveal uncertainty beneath. Chuck weathered by time yet somehow ageless, barely breathing hard, his calm unbroken from beginning to end. "I don't understand," Blaze said, his voice low enough that only Chuck could hear it. "I've trained my whole life. I'm in my prime. You're older than your grandfather. Probably." Chuck finished for him, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. The first hint of warmth he'd shown all night. "Age isn't what you think it is." "Then what is it?" "Just a number. What matters is what you've done with the time." The words were simple, yet they landed with the weight of lived truth. Not a platitude, but a reality Chuck had earned the right to express. Blaze looked down, then back up, meeting Chuck's eyes directly for the first time, without aggression or bravado. "You could have humiliated me. Could have knocked me out in front of everyone." Chuck shook his head slightly. "That wouldn't have taught you anything worth learning. And this did? That's up to you." The referee approached cautiously, unsure how to officially conclude what had never been an official match. Chuck solved the problem by simply turning and walking toward the cage door. No raised hands, no victory lap, no playing to the crowd. His purpose fulfilled, he was ready to move on. As he reached the edge of the cage, he paused and looked back at Blaze, who stood frozen in the center, still processing what had happened. "True strength," Chuck said, his voice quiet but carrying in the hushed arena, "isn't about dominating others. It's about mastering yourself." With that, he exited the cage, leaving Blaze alone with the wisdom bomb that had just been dropped on him. The crowd's response was immediate and overwhelming. As Chuck descended the steps, the entire arena rose to its feet. The applause was deafening, punctuated by chants of, "Chuck! Chuck! Chuck!" that echoed through the building. From his position at the center of the cage, Blaze watched Chuck's retreat, his mind still reeling. For years, he had defined himself by his victories, by his ability to dominate other fighters. His identity had become inseparable from his record, his social media following, his public persona. Now, that foundation had been shaken not by defeat, but by the revelation that he had been measuring himself against the wrong standard all along. He had thought martial arts was about who could hit hardest, move fastest, dominate most completely. Chuck had shown him it was about something else entirely, about control, efficiency, the transcendence of ego, about principles that couldn't be captured in highlight reels or championship belts. For the first time since he had entered professional fighting, Blaze felt truly seen, not as the persona he projected, but as the martial artist he could become if he let go of what no longer served him. Meanwhile, Chuck moved through the adulation with the same calm he had faced the challenge, in neither seeking it nor rejecting it, simply acknowledging its presence and moving through it. Fans reached out as he passed, not grabbing but extending their hands in reverence, hoping for the briefest contact with someone who embodied what they had just witnessed. A young girl, no more than 10, caught Chuck's eye from her father's shoulders. She wore a white gi, with a yellow belt, a beginner in her martial arts journey. Their gazes met, and Chuck's expression softened. He gave her a small, respectful bow, martial artist to martial artist, regardless of age or rank. The girl's face lit up, and she returned the bow with solemn precision. In that exchange lay the essence of what had just been demonstrated in the cage: respect, transcending age, skill level, gender. The fundamentals that unified all true practitioners. Big Mike waited at the bottom of the steps, Chuck's jacket ready. As the older martial artist slipped it on, the two exchanged a look that contained volumes. Not just about tonight, but about all the challenges they had faced together over decades. "Still got it, boss," Big Mike said, the rare words heavy with meaning. Chuck simply nodded, neither agreeing nor disagreeing. His focus was already shifting away from the arena, away from the spectacle, back to the quiet discipline that had defined his life, long before cameras ever captured it. From the commentary booth, Kayla Torres struggled to find words adequate to what they had just witnessed. "Ladies and gentlemen," she finally said, her voice thick with emotion, "I'm not sure how to contextualize what we just saw. This wasn't just a physical confrontation. This was a passing of wisdom. A reminder of what martial arts is supposed to be about." Her co-commentator nodded. "Chuck Norris didn't just win a fight tonight. He showed us the difference between fighting and martial arts, between competition and mastery." "I've been covering MMA for 15 years, Kayla continued, "and I started in traditional martial arts myself as a child. What we just witnessed bridges those worlds in a way I've never seen before. It reminds us that beneath the spectacle, there are principles that have endured for centuries." As she spoke, the arena screens replayed key moments from the encounter. Not the most aggressive or dramatic, but the most instructive. Chuck's effortless evasions, the perfect timing of his redirections, the economy of movement that made his counters seem almost invisible. Each replay drew gasps of appreciation from the crowd, who were seeing these subtleties clearly now that the initial shock had passed. What had appeared simple in real time revealed its complexity in repetition: the perfect distancing, the precise angles, the deep understanding of body mechanics that informed every movement. Inside the cage, Blaze remained at center, the crowd's reaction washing over him like a physical wave. For perhaps the first time in his career, he wasn't the focus of their attention. He wasn't receiving either adulation or criticism. He was simply part of something larger, a moment that would be remembered long after his record and his rankings were forgotten. His management team entered the cage, surrounding him with concerned faces and urgent whispers. Was he okay? Should they protest? Was there publicity to be managed? The old man got lucky, his manager insisted, already crafting the narrative. "We'll spin this. Get you a proper rematch under official rules. The internet's blowing up, we can use this." The words that would have energized Blaze an hour ago now rang hollow. He looked at his team, really looked at them, and saw not supporters but enablers. People who had encouraged his worst tendencies because those tendencies sold tickets and generated clicks. "Did you see what just happened?" he asked. His voice, quiet, but intent. "Really see it?" His manager blinked, taken aback by the question. "Of course. He caught you off guard. It happens. We'll make sure the rematch." "There won't be a rematch," Blaze interrupted. "There won't be any spin. What happened here was real." The management team exchanged concerned glances, sensing their carefully constructed business model beginning to crack. "Look, kid," his agent cut in, "you're emotional right now. That's normal after a loss. But let's be smart about this. Your brand. My brand." Blaze repeated the words slowly, as if hearing them for the first time. "That's all you see, isn't it? Not a martial artist. Not even a fighter. Just a brand to be marketed. That's not fair. We've built something huge together. Your social following, your sponsorships, and what has it cost me?" The question wasn't accusatory, but genuinely searching. Blaze looked around the cage, the space that had defined his identity for years, and felt suddenly adrift. What have I become? His team had no answer for that. They saw only the potential revenue slipping away, the carefully cultivated image in danger of transformation. Blaze waved them away, his eyes still fixed on the tunnel where Chuck had disappeared. Something fundamental had shifted inside him, a crack in the foundation of his self-image that could either break him apart or allow new growth to emerge. "Are you all right?" his manager pressed, alarmed by his silence. Blaze nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think I might be all right for the first time." Beyond the immediate drama in the cage, the impact of what had transpired spread throughout the arena and beyond. In the stands, parents who had brought children to witness spectacle found themselves having unexpected conversations about respect, discipline, and the true purpose of martial arts training. "Did you see how he never got angry?" a father asked his young son. "Even when that fighter was saying all those mean things?" The boy nodded, eyes wide. He was so calm, like nothing could bother him. That's what real strength looks like. Not showing off or being the loudest. Being in control of yourself, no matter what. Similar conversations echoed throughout the arena, moments of genuine connection and teaching sparked by what they had witnessed. In the VIP section, several prominent fighters from various disciplines sat in thoughtful silence. They had come expecting entertainment, perhaps validation of their own approaches to combat sports. Instead, they found themselves questioning fundamentals, reconsidering priorities. "We've forgotten something important," a champion heavyweight said quietly to his training partner. "Gotten so caught up in the business that we've lost sight of the art." Meanwhile, Chuck and Big Mike made their way through the backstage area, where staff members and fighters lined the corridor in spontaneous tribute. No one approached. No one asked for autographs or photos. They simply stood in respect, acknowledging what had been demonstrated. A young production assistant, barely out of college, found herself standing straighter as Chuck passed. Something about his presence, no intimidating, but grounded, inspired an instinctive response. A desire to rise to a standard she hadn't known existed until this moment. Coach Ramirez emerged from a side hallway, positioning himself directly in Chuck's path. The two old warriors regarded each other for a moment, decades of shared history passing between them in silence. "Had to be done," Ramirez said finally, extending his hand. "The sport's losing its way." Chuck took the offered hand. "Not lost yet. Just needs reminding sometimes." "Think he got the message?" "We'll see. Seeds take time to grow." They parted without further words, each understanding that actions had already said everything necessary. Ramirez watched Chuck continue down the corridor, then turned back toward the arena. He had work to do, a young fighter who might, if the lesson had taken root, be ready for real guidance for the first time in his career. Back in the arena, the crowd's attention had finally returned to Blaze. The young fighter stood at the edge of the cage, looking out over the sea of faces with new eyes. The adoration he had sought so desperately now seemed hollow compared to the respect he had just witnessed directed at Chuck. The cage announcer approached, microphone extended, clearly expecting the usual post-fight bravado. Blaze looked at it for a long moment, then gently pushed it away. No words seemed adequate. No statement could encapsulate what had just happened. Sometimes, silence was the only appropriate response to profound change. Instead of speaking, Blaze moved to the center of the cage once more. He stood for a moment, gathering himself, then did something that shocked the audience further. He knelt, folding his body into a formal Caesar position, head bowed in reflection. The gesture wasn't practiced or performative. It was raw, authentic, the physical manifestation of an internal shift, a recognition of something larger than himself, larger than this moment, larger than the sport as he had known it. The crowd, which had been beginning to chatter again, fell silent once more. Even those with no martial arts background recognized the significance of what they were witnessing. A champion setting aside his ego, embracing humility not as defeat, but as the first step toward genuine growth. Jordan Lee, who had been live streaming continuously, lowered his phone for the first time all night. Some moments weren't meant to be broadcast or monetized. Some transformations needed to be witnessed with full presence, not through a screen. In the commentary booth, Kayla removed her headset, unwilling to narrate what was unfolding. Her co-commentator followed suit. This wasn't about analysis anymore. It was about bearing witness to something authentic in a world increasingly defined by performance. As medical staff entered to check Blaze over standard procedure after any bout remained kneeling for another long moment, then rose with a new steadiness. He submitted to their examination with uncharacteristic humility. No complaints, no impatience, no demands. Just quiet compliance as they confirmed what was already obvious. He was physically unharmed. Emotionally, spiritually, that was a different matter entirely. One of the medical team leaned in as she checked his vitals. "You okay, champ?" she asked, genuine concern in her voice. Blaze met her eyes with newfound clarity. "I think I might be better than okay. I think I might be awake." The words weren't for the cameras or the crowd. They were simply truth, spoken in the moment of its realization. As he finally exited the cage, Blaze carried with him not the sting of defeat, but the weight of possibility. The potential to become something more than he had been, not just a better fighter, but a more complete martial artist, a more integrated human being. The arena lights began to dim, signaling the end of the event. Fans rose from their seats, but the usual rush for the exits was absent. People moved slowly, conversing in hushed tones, processing what they had witnessed. Not just a fight, not just a spectacle, but a moment of genuine transformation. In that transition from artificial light to natural darkness, something essential had been illuminated not just for Blaze, but for everyone present. A reminder that beneath the hype, the commercialization, and the ego, martial arts remained what it had always been: a path towards self-mastery, a way of being in the world with integrity, discipline, and respect. The lesson had been delivered. Its full impact remained to be seen. But in the quiet aftermath, as the arena emptied and the night deepened, one truth was already clear. Some victories transcend the cage. Some fights aren't about defeating an opponent, but about conquering oneself. And some lessons, once truly learned, change everything that follows. Dawn broke over Las Vegas, painting the strip in colors that seemed more vivid than usual. In hotel rooms, at breakfast tables, and across social media, the conversation remained focused on a single topic: what had transpired in the cage the night before. Chuck Norris vs. Blaze had been trending for hours, accompanied by clips viewed tens of millions of times. But unlike the usual viral fight moments, these weren't focused on brutality or humiliation. They captured something rarer: wisdom in action. In a quiet corner of the MGM Grand's restaurant, Kayla Torres sat with her producer, reviewing coverage for the morning shows. The dark circles under her eyes testified to a night spent reflecting rather than sleeping. Every major outlet picked it up, the producer said, scrolling through his tablet. ESPN, Fox Sports, even the mainstream networks. The angles consistent across the board: martial arts legend teaches humility to cocky champion. Kayla nodded, her eyes tired but satisfied. For once, they got it right. This wasn't about age or embarrassment. It was about principles. Principles don't usually get 50 million views by breakfast, the producer remarked, still scrolling. Look at these comments. People are sharing stories about their own martial arts journeys, posting old photos of themselves in GIFs, tagging their former senseis and coaches to thank them. That's the real victory, Kayla said quietly. Not what happened in the cage, but what's happening now. People remembering why they started training in the first place. Speaking of which, the producer slid his tablet across the table. You might want to see Blaze's statement. Kayla raised an eyebrow, expecting damage control or excuses. Instead, she found a simple text post from Blaze's official accounts. Last night, I was given a gift I didn't deserve. Not a beating, but a lesson. Chuck Norris showed me the difference between being a fighter and being a martial artist. I have a long way to go, but the journey starts today. Respect is ageless. Accompanying the text was a photo not of the confrontation itself, but of Blaze kneeling at center cage after Chuck had left. The image captured a moment of genuine reflection that no PR team could have manufactured. Well, Kayla said, a smile touching her lips. Looks like the lesson might have taken. Her producer leaned back, genuinely surprised. I've covered Blaze's career since he went pro. Never seen anything like this from him. No excuses, no promises to come back stronger, no calling out his next opponent. Maybe because this wasn't a loss in the usual sense, Kayla observed. He didn't get knocked out or submitted. He got awakened. Across town, in a modest hotel suite far from the Strip's glitz, Chuck Norris performed his morning routine as he had for decades. Stretches, push-ups, core work, meditation. The discipline that had carried him through 84 years of life continued uninterrupted by last night's events. Sunlight streamed through the partially opened curtains, illuminating the sparse room. No luxury amenities, no excessive comforts. Just the essentials, meticulously arranged. Like the man himself, the space was defined by its intentionality, its absence of excess. Big Mike entered with coffee, setting it silently on the table before taking a seat in the corner chair. The two had worked out a rhythm over their years, together knowing when to speak, when to maintain silence, when presence alone was sufficient. Your phone's been blowing up, he noted after Chuck completed his final set of exercises. Everyone from Good Morning America to Joe Rogan wants an interview. Chuck toweled off, then reached for the coffee, taking a moment to appreciate its aroma before responding. Not interested. Figured as much. Big Mike sipped his own coffee. That kid's statement is making the rounds. Seems sincere. Time will tell. Always does. Big Mike hesitated, then added, You knew, didn't you? When you accepted his challenge, you knew it wasn't about putting him in his place. Chuck's eyes crinkled slightly at the corners, the closest he typically came to a smile. Wasn't about him at all. It was about what he represents. What the sport's becoming. Think it made a difference? To him? Maybe. To others watching? Hope so. The conversation paused as Chuck moved to the window, looking out at the desert landscape beyond the city's artificial skyline. The contrast was striking, nature's ancient patience against mankind's urgent constructions. After a moment, he continued, his voice thoughtful. When I was coming up, martial arts wasn't about cage fights or championships, it was about character development, discipline, respect. He shook his head slightly. Somewhere along the way, that got lost in the spectacle. You reminded them. Tried to. Big Mike nodded, understanding the weight behind the simple words. Chuck had never been one for lengthy explanations or philosophical dissertations. Like his fighting style, his communication was economical, precise, containing no wasted motion. The veterans get it, Big Mike observed. Seen a lot of old-timers posting about last night, saying it was like watching the essence of martial arts, not just the techniques. Chuck turned from the window. And the younger ones? Mixed. Some don't understand what they saw. Others. Big Mike scrolled through his phone. Others are asking questions for the first time. Real ones. About the deeper aspects of training, not just how to win fights. A nod. That was enough. Questions were the beginning of any genuine path. Back at the arena, preparations were underway for tonight's fights. Another card. Another crowd. Another spectacle. But something had changed in the atmosphere. Staff who had witnessed the previous night moved with a different energy, handling their tasks with greater care, greater purpose. A young stagehand carefully mopped the cage floor, his movements more deliberate than usual. Last night, this had ceased to be just another fighting platform. It had become, however briefly, something sacred, a space where truth had been demonstrated through action. The venue manager noticed the difference. You're taking your time with that today, Miguel. The stagehand nodded without looking up. Feels different now, you know? After what happened, the manager understood. He'd been in the fight business for 20 years, had seen the evolution from niche combat sport to global entertainment juggernaut. Last night had reminded him of something he'd almost forgotten: why he'd been drawn to martial arts in the first place, long before the glitz and marketing had taken over. In a back corridor, Coach Ramirez found himself face to face with Blaze, who had come to collect his belongings from the locker room. The young fighter looked different, quieter, more contained. His usual swagger replaced by something more grounded. "How you feeling, kid?" Ramirez asked, genuinely curious. Blaze considered the question seriously. "Like I got my ass handed to me without taking a single real hit. That about sums it up." "How did he do it?" "I've trained with the best. I've beaten champions. But last night," he shook his head, still processing. "It wasn't even a fight. It was like he knew what I was going to do before I did." Ramirez leaned against the wall, regarding the young fighter with new interest. The cocky exterior had cracked, revealing something more authentic beneath a genuine searcher, perhaps, who had lost his way in the glare of success and attention. That's what happens when you've been practicing the same moves for 60 years. Chuck doesn't see techniques anymore. He sees patterns, principles. Can that be taught? The techniques? Sure. The wisdom? That you have to earn. Blaze nodded slowly, absorbing the distinction. I want to learn the real way. Not just to win fights, but to. He struggled to articulate something he'd never considered before. To be better. Ramirez studied him for a long moment, searching for signs of the old ego, the performative hunger for attention. Finding none, he made a decision. I know some people. Old school. They don't train champions, they train martial artists. It's a different path. Slower. Harder in some ways. I want it. We'll see. Ramirez pushed off from the wall. Actions. Not words, kid. Start by taking 6 months off. No fights, no social media, no spotlight. Then come see me. 6 months? Blaze looked genuinely shocked. But my ranking, my sponsors, will still be there if you're meant to return. Or they won't. And you'll have learned something valuable either way. Ramirez turned to leave, then paused. That's the first test. choosing what matters more, the path or the recognition. He walked away, leaving Blaze alone with a choice that would define his future more profoundly than any match outcome. The young fighter stood in the corridor, sponsors' logos emblazoned across his jacket, phone buzzing incessantly in his pocket with notifications, offers, demands for comments. 6 months away from all this seemed impossible. Yet, for the first time, it also seemed necessary. He pulled out his phone, scrolled through dozens of messages from his management team, most containing some variation of "we need to talk" or "crisis management meeting" ASAP. His thumb hovered over the call button for his agent, then shifted to the power button instead. One decisive press, and the screen went dark. A small step, but a beginning. Meanwhile, across the country, in dojos and training halls, instructors were already incorporating last night's lesson into their teachings. Clips from the encounter became teaching tools, demonstrations of principles that transcended any particular fighting style. In a small karate dojo in Chicago's North Side, a sensei gathered her students around a tablet. Most were children, some teenagers, a few adults, all watching with rapt attention as Chuck effortlessly redirected Blaze's most powerful strikes. "Notice how he never opposes force directly," she pointed out. "He redirects, harmonizes, uses his opponent's energy against them. That's not just technique, it's philosophy." A young boy raised his hand. "But sensei, isn't the point to win fights?" The instructor smiled, recognizing the question as an opportunity. "What is winning? Is it making someone else lose, or is it becoming the best version of yourself?" The children considered this, faces scrunched in concentration. "Both?" ventured another student. "Perhaps," the sensei acknowledged. "But last night we saw something important. Chuck Norris didn't need to hurt his opponent to demonstrate his mastery. True victory isn't about domination. It's about transcending the need to dominate." In a mixed martial arts gym in Atlanta, a coach gathered fighters around a screen. Most were competition-focused, training for upcoming bouts, their mindset firmly rooted in the modern combat sports paradigm. "Forget about the age difference," the coach instructed. "Focus on the efficiency. Every movement has purpose. Nothing wasted. That's what we should all aspire to." One fighter, a rising prospect with championship ambitions, looked skeptical. "But he didn't even throw any real strikes. How would that work in an actual match?" "That's missing the point," the coach replied. "What Chuck showed wasn't a specific technique set, it was mastery of fundamentals. Position, timing, distance. The things we drill every day but often forget in the heat of competition." He rewound the video to a specific moment, Chuck's minimal movement to evade Blaze's most aggressive combination. "Look at this. Half an inch of movement at exactly the right time. That's not luck or reflexes. That's understanding the physics of combat at a level most of us never reach." The fighters leaned closer, seeing with new eyes. The ripple effect continued across social media, where the usual toxic commentary had been largely replaced by genuine appreciation. Even those who had come to mock found themselves reluctantly respectful. It was hard to watch what had transpired and not feel something authentic, a connection to martial arts' deeper purpose that many had forgotten or never known. A college philosophy professor posted a thoughtful thread, connecting what had happened in the cage to ancient Taoist principles, the concept of Wu Wei, or effortless action. The thread went viral, introducing thousands to ideas they might never have encountered otherwise. Veterans organizations shared their own perspectives, highlighting Chuck's decades of work supporting military and first responder communities. What had begun as entertainment was evolving into something more meaningful, a cultural moment that transcended the initial spectacle. Jordan Lee, whose live stream of the event had garnered millions of views, posted a follow-up video unlike any he'd made before. Gone was the hyperactive delivery and clickbait framing. Instead, he spoke directly to his audience, uncharacteristically thoughtful. I've been covering fights for years, always chasing the most dramatic moments, the biggest reactions. Last night I thought I was going to capture an old legend getting embarrassed. Instead, I witnessed something that made me question what I've been celebrating all this time. He paused, visibly emotional. Chuck Norris reminded us that real strength isn't about dominating others or getting attention. It's about mastering yourself, about having nothing to prove, yet standing firm in your truth. I don't know about you guys, but that's something I want to learn more about. The video concluded not with his usual call for likes and subscriptions, but with a simple question. What matters most to you? By mid-afternoon, the first serious analyses began appearing not just from sports commentators, but from martial arts historians and cultural critics. They placed the encounter in context, drawing parallels to legendary moments when the essence of a discipline was demonstrated in unexpected ways. One particularly thoughtful piece concluded, "What we witnessed wasn't just an older fighter schooling a younger one. It was a physical demonstration of values that have become increasingly rare in our attention economy. Humility, efficiency, earned wisdom, and the quiet confidence that comes from decades of disciplined practice." Chuck Norris didn't just win a confrontation. He reminded us what victory really means. In a small dojo on the outskirts of Las Vegas, far from the Strip's neon and noise, an elderly instructor sat in meditation. His phone had been ringing all morning, former students calling to discuss what had happened, reporters seeking comments, curious newcomers inquiring about classes. He had watched the encounter from the arena's upper level, unnoticed among the crowd. Now, as he centered himself in the quiet of his training space, he reflected on what his old friend Chuck had accomplished. Not a defense of ego or reputation, but a defense of principles. A reminder of the thread that connected traditional martial arts to their modern expressions, often obscured but never broken. A soft knock at the dojo door interrupted his thoughts. He opened his eyes to find a young man standing uncertainly at the threshold. Blaze Carter. Without entourage or cameras, dressed in simple street clothes rather than his usual branded attire. "I was told you might be willing to speak with me," Blaze said, his usual confidence replaced by genuine humility. The old instructor studied him for a moment, then gestured for him to enter. "Remove your shoes," he instructed, "and leave your expectations at the door as well." Blaze complied, stepping into the simple space with its worn mats and faded photos of masters long departed. This was nothing like the state-of-the-art facilities he typically trained in, with their high-tech equipment and recovery tools. Yet something about its simplicity felt right, a return to essentials, to foundations. "I want to learn," he said simply. The instructor nodded. Everyone wants knowledge. Few are willing to unlearn what blocks it. As evening approached, Chuck and Big Mike prepared to leave Las Vegas, their bags packed, their rental car waiting. No private jets, no entourages, no fuss. The same way they had arrived. "One last thing," Big Mike said, holding out his phone. "Thought you might want to see this." On the screen was a video taken just an hour earlier. It showed Blaze entering a small traditional dojo on the outskirts of Las Vegas. Not for publicity, there were no cameras except the security footage that had captured the moment. The young fighter had removed his shoes, bowed at the entrance, and approached the elderly instructor with his head lowered in respect. Chuck watched silently, then handed the phone back with a nod of acknowledgement. Nothing more needed to be said. As they drove away from the hotel, the sun setting behind them, Chuck gazed out at the open desert. Last night already felt distant, just one moment in a lifetime dedicated to principles larger than any single event. Was it worth it? Big Mike asked, eyes on the road ahead. Coming out of retirement for this? Chuck considered the question, his weathered face thoughtful. wasn't about retirement. Wasn't even about that young man, really. What was it about then? Reminding people what matters. Chuck's eyes crinkled at the corners. And maybe reminding myself, too. They drove on in comfortable silence. Two old warriors who had seen enough of life to value its quieter truths. As the car left the city limits, heading east toward the rising moon, Chuck reflected on the patterns of his life, the battles fought, the lessons learned, the wisdom earned through decades of discipline. At 84, he had nothing left to prove, no titles to defend, no reputation to uphold. What remained was simply the path itself, and the opportunity to illuminate it for others when the moment called. Back in the heart of Las Vegas, preparations for tonight's fights continued. The cage had been cleaned, the lights reset, the promotional materials updated. But something had changed in how the staff approached their work, a new awareness, a greater sense of purpose. In the commentator's booth, Kayla Torres prepared her notes for the evening's matches. But her mind kept returning to what she had witnessed the night before, and to the responsibility she now felt to honor it. "You okay?" her producer asked, noticing her distraction. Kayla nodded slowly. "Just thinking about how to talk about these fights differently now. How to focus more on the art and less on the spectacle. That's a tough balance in this business." "Maybe. But if last night proved anything, it's that people are hungry for something real. Something that matters beyond the hype." She glanced down at her usual commentary, notes filled with statistics, rivalries, promotional angles. With quiet determination, she set them aside and began writing from scratch. This time focusing on the fighters' journeys, their discipline, the principles demonstrated in their techniques. A small change, perhaps, but meaningful in its intention. As the arena began to fill once more with expectant fans, there was a subtle but palpable difference in the atmosphere. Conversations seemed more thoughtful, appreciation more nuanced. Many who had come primarily for violence now found themselves discussing technique, discipline, the mental aspects of combat. A small shift, perhaps, but significant, like the first ripples from a stone dropped in still water, spreading outward in concentric circles whose full reach could not yet be measured. In the small dojo across town, Blaze sat in formal Caesar position, listening as the elderly instructor explained the first principles of the art. He taught not techniques or combinations, but concepts, awareness, intention, harmony, the foundation upon which all else would be built. "Today, you begin again," the instructor told him. "Forget your record, your reputation, your rank. Here, you are simply a student." Blaze bowed, accepting the terms without reservation. The path ahead would be long and humbling, requiring him to set aside everything he thought he knew. But for the first time in years, he felt like he was moving in the right direction, not toward fame or fortune, but toward something more essential. And somewhere on a desert highway, driving away from the spectacle but carrying its essence with him, Chuck Norris continued his lifelong journey, not as a celebrity or even as a martial arts legend, but simply as a practitioner of principles that had guided him through 8 decades of life. His greatest victory hadn't come from defeating a younger, stronger opponent. It had come from staying true to his path, from embodying the discipline he had practiced since youth, and from passing that understanding forward not through words or instruction manuals, but through action. In a world obsessed with youth, with spectacle, with constant reinvention, he had demonstrated the power of consistency, of earned wisdom, of values that never age or become obsolete. He had shown that respect isn't just given or taken, it's lived. And that, perhaps, was the most important lesson of alone that would continue to resonate long after the lights dimmed and the crowds dispersed. A reminder that true martial arts isn't about what happens in a cage or on a screen, but about how we conduct ourselves in every moment, with or without an audience. A lesson as timeless as the desert stars now appearing overhead, guiding travelers home. Up next, we have two more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.